Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Graham Pass, Chairman of the committee. Other members of the committee present are councillors Graham Bridgman, Jeremy Cottam, Tony Linden, Alan Macro, Ross McKinnon, Jeff Mays, Richard Somner and Keith Woodhams. The following officers are in attendance to advise and to support the meeting. Lydia Mather, our team leader in development control, Emma Nucci, a principal planning officer who will be presenting the item this evening, Sharon R. Moore, our principal lawyer, planning and governance to keep me under control if for no other reason, to keep us all legal, Paul Goddard, team leader, highways development control, Jess Bayliss, our clerk, taking the minutes, and Lizzie Reeves, who's in charge of Zoom and zooming the cameras in and out. We're attempting this without being on the internet as such, but it will be live streamed on YouTube. Now, before we start proceedings, I've just said it'll be on Zoom, and councillors are present in the chamber, still sort of socially distanced. The meeting is being live streamed, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the chamber, when you speak, to switch on your microphones when invited and to speak directly into them, and of course to switch them off when you've finished. I also ask you to make sure that your mobile phones are set to silent, and I think it's irrelevant to say tablets have their sound turned off. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route and follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is in the Dolphin Pub car park. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we'll remain seated and await instructions from the officers. We will adjourn the meeting then until such time it is safe to proceed. Any questions, members? In that case, and I will explain the procedure as we get to it for those in the chamber wishing to speak at the appropriate time. So item 1 is apologies for absence. Jess.
Yes, Chairman, so I've received an apology from Councillor Alan Law, and Councillor Graham Bridgman is in attendance as a substitute.
Thank you very much. Minutes, members, all the way back to the 16th of November last year. If any of you can remember how that meeting went, may I please sign them as a true and correct record?
Proposed, Chairman.
Thank you. I have a seconder. And all those in favour? Thank you, Councillor Macro, seconded, by the way, Jess.
Yes, Chairman, I wasn't present, so that's why.
I understand, of course.
Yeah, so second abstention here, Chairman.
Item 3, any declarations of interest? Oh, Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I declare a personal interest in that I live fairly close to the site, but as I say, it's a personal interest and I will continue to debate and vote on the application.
Yeah, understood. And of course, Speaker's Ward member. Item 4, then, it's the only application we have on the agenda tonight, which is Lakeside, the Green Thiel in Reading. Emma, would you please present the item?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Sorry. Sorry, wait be a moment. I'm just going to move through the slideshow. There we go. Okay, so the item on the agenda this evening is a reserved matters application for development at Lakeside, the Green in Thiel. So say it's a reserved matters proposal for 290 units, including 70 extra care units. The application considers the matters of detail relating to an outline permission for up to 325 houses and flats and 70 extra care units. Before we can consider the application, I have been asked by a number of members about the other applications that are pending on the site at the moment, and details of these are in the update sheet, item number 3. Just to talk you through those, there's 2 other applications. They're not material considerations that needs to be looked at in tonight's meeting. But just as way of background, really, we have an application to modify the legal agreement, which is secured under the outline permission for the site for the 325 homes. And the applicant seeking to remove the late review mechanism with regards to the affordable housing and increase the amount of affordable housing on the site from 12.5% to 30%. And by increasing the affordable housing, so it's policy compliant, they're looking to remove that late review mechanism that was in the agreement. And alongside that is a full planning application for 54 units, 50 affordable and 4 market houses. And this will essentially be the 30% affordable housing that will be delivered alongside that alteration to the legal agreements. The applicant used the pre-application process to engage with officers early on to set out how they wanted to move forward to enable them to develop this site. So those applications are pending. They haven't been, there's no recommendation for them yet. And as I say, they're not material to tonight's considerations, but just so members are aware. And for clarification for the public as well, because I know there has been some questions around that. So moving on to the item we have in front of us this evening, as I say, under the outline application, condition 6 asked for details of the scale and layout to generally accord with 2 parameter plans. So we had a layout parameter plan that was approved, which, as you can see, it showed the inspector at the time how the site could be developed for up to 325 homes. It identified some constraints and separation distances. And there was another plan that was approved at outline, which was in relation to building height. A number of comments have been made with regards to the height of the buildings and the density of the development. The proposals before us comply with the parameter plans, and the scheme and design of the buildings considers both the site context and those approved details already. So, for example, on this heights plan, we can see that the buildings in the green area behind the houses that front onto the green, these have been designed as 2-storey houses with some viaducts in the roof and dormers in the roof to look over the properties onto the green, and they all fit within the heights set out on this drawing. So, for example, at appeal, the parameter plan allowed buildings up to 10.8 metres to the ridge. And the buildings within this area are around 10 metres high or 9 metres high. So they fit comfortably within those parameters. And similarly, that has been looked at in relation to other buildings as well. So moving on to the layout we now have to consider. This is the layout that's been presented as part of the application. So we can see that there are different character areas. We have got, this is a massing plan which shows how the apartments and houses are spread across the site. The yellow buildings are 2-storey. The green buildings are 2-storey with rooms in the roof. And then we have the flats, which are either 3-storey, the purple ones, or the orange ones, which are 4-storey. So you can see how they've been distributed, with the houses closer to the properties on the green, and then the taller buildings fronting onto the lake. And on the corner of the site, we have the extra care units, which are in a 4-storey building, and they look onto the roundabout on the A4. So the layout seeks to create different character areas. It provides loops and a layout that's suitable for the site. This is just some photos showing you views across the site at the moment. It is undeveloped and sort of remains largely as sort of scrubland. And this tree that you can see in this drawing is actually the tree that I'm just going to just point the arrow to just there, if you can see it. That tree there is within that resident's back garden. So that just gives you an idea of the context for that photo. We have some street scenes which show the variety in house types and designs, and some visuals which accompanied the application. This is a view looking across the lake at the houses that will back onto the green and front onto the open water. In terms of the green, this will be a familiar scene from what we saw on site the other day. The entranceway is already formed under a previous application, and then there's existing frontage development along the green. And this is just a visual to show what the development will look like in terms of the way it addresses the road. And then these are the apartment blocks, which are 3 and 4 stories high. As you can see, they have been articulated to really sort of break up the bulk of the buildings, add some detailing in terms of materials, balconies, the fenestration, and different bricks and render in order to sort of create attractive buildings that look onto the water. And while they are tall buildings, as I say, the different ridge lines and roof heights help to break up the bulk and massing. And this is a view from the A4. There will also be a closed boarded fence along this boundary, not for acoustic purposes, but just to provide a sort of little bit of separation from the road. So when we've assessed this application, we are mindful of both the parameter plans that have been approved at outline stage. We're also mindful of the context and the relationship with the neighbouring properties. And the other thing to be aware of and consider is an extant permission at the site, which is for 350 homes and flats. It's actually a permission that only relates to South Lakeside. So as you can see, the area to the north isn't included in this. So it's a much denser development because you're looking at 350 homes on a smaller area. Our proposal that we're considering this evening is for 290 homes on a larger site. So this is an old permission granted back in 2004, but it has the benefit of a certificate of existing lawful development, so it could therefore be completed at any time. All conditions were discharged and it could be built out. So work started in regard to this consent in terms of the construction of the access, which is the access that this permission will utilise. And we've just got some approved elevations here, which give you an idea of the development that has been approved. It's given the higher numbers, as you can appreciate, it's generally a flatted scheme. You've got 5 sort of story buildings, and it's a different take on the architecture. Obviously, they've gone for like a modern flat roof building as opposed to something more traditional. So it's quite a contrast, but it's an example of what could be built on site. So I think members do need to also be aware of that when looking at the impact and character of these proposals. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions in the committee report, condition 16 on the update sheet, and also there was a condition 17 on the update sheet, and that has actually been amended in line with the condition that's now on the screen right now. It serves a similar purpose, but in fact it's more in depth, and I will read that out to you for completeness. And it's obviously in front of you to consider, but it's asking for details of road and footpath design. So for roads serving more than 5 dwellings, the detailed layout of the site shall comply with the local authority standards in respect of road and footpath design to an adoptable standard unless exclusions apply. No works shall commence in respect of the construction of the sub-base of the associated roads and footpaths until details of highways construction have been submitted and approved by the local authority. All road and footpath design shall then be constructed as per the approved plans, and this condition shall apply, notwithstanding any indications to these matters that have been given in the current application. So it's just a more in-depth condition than that was presented on the update sheet. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emma. Members, I know there could well be questions, but please, if you could just wait before asking them until those wishing to address us have spoken, because very often, as you know, the answers can come from them. So I have two parish council representatives, Councillor Zoe Fenwick and Councillor Gary Miles, who isn't down to speak. I was a resident, right? Okay, well, it's you, Councillor Fenwick. So please come to the dais. You will find to the right at the bottom, you'll see like a person with a sound coming out. That's the microphone. You have up to 5 minutes, which do you want any time keeping a minute to go? Yeah. I'll do that. But please, when you finish, remain there for any questions members may have.
Thank you, Councillor Parks. So I'm speaking on behalf of Theale Parish Council. We have a lot of concerns around this development. Firstly, we appreciate the fact that the number of houses has been reduced, but this does still mean at least a 20% increase in the residents' population of Theale. Therefore, we would ask the council, when they're considering your decisions, what measures will be put in place to make the planning acceptable in planning terms in relation to the highways infrastructure. The road that is the development comes out onto is already extremely busy, particularly the roundabout, and that could mean an extra 600 vehicles coming out onto that road during peak times. Also, the educational needs of residents that will be moving into that development. Both schools are already very well subscribed, so how would they be accommodated within that? The sewerage network is also at capacity, so again, another 300 homes does actually put quite a lot of pressure onto the network. Community space, we would ask what community space is being incorporated into this development to help those residents actually be part of the wider Theale community, as well as green space and actually helping to support the biodiversity, particularly as there are populations of nightjars, nightingales and water voles who are all critically endangered or vulnerable on that site, and also to make it in line with West Berkshire's council's own environmental strategy. Finally, we would like to ask the council to consider removing PD rights to these properties so that none of the attics or loft spaces can be converted, and neither can the garages either, because that will generally increase the number of parking onto the streets and make it more difficult for those residents to park, but also access for vehicles such as rubbish trucks, fire engines, etc. And finally, in relation to the height of the properties, we appreciate there is the outstanding planning or the previously approved planning application, but we would actually like to point out to the council that there are actually no other buildings in the vicinity of the development that have over 3 stories. We feel that that would actually very much damage the character of the area and also the village itself. Thank you.
Very succinct in under 3 minutes. Well done. Please stay there. Members, any questions, please, for Councillor Fenwick? Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you for that. 2 points for you to respond to. Take them as questions, if you will. Firstly, you'll know, I hope, that our parking policies do not count garages as part of the number of parking spaces. Now, that's deliberate because we know people convert garages, but if they do convert garages and the application complies with our parking policy, then there will be the right number of parking spaces remaining even after the garage has been conserved. So do you accept that, for a question? Do you accept that as a point of principle when we're looking at this application?
Yes, we do. It's just the fact that obviously as families grow and they look to have more room in the houses, garages then become a obvious point for development, which means that then they're actually bringing more cars back onto the road. I know that it's actually counted in the policy, but it's actually thinking about people's future actions.
Yeah, interesting point, Chairman. When you count on number of bedrooms in our parking policy, if you have a garage then converted to a bedroom, which increases the number of bedrooms, how do you deal with the number of parking spaces that you've given permission for? Interesting. The second point, I think you anticipated. I've been looking at the decision that this council took back in, as it turns out, December 2016, when we looked at and it turns out I was on the committee. I have to say 7 years later, or 6.5 years later, it's a little hazy, but obviously one of the major points that's been raised by the parish and by residents is the height of buildings. And clearly we have an outline permission. So I just want to understand how you would say if, and we'll test this with officers, the outline permission effectively deals with the height of buildings on that site, and this application is in compliance with that. Now, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, we'll test that. How the parish responds to the point, okay, well, there's already a permission.
We realise that there's probably not much that we can do about it, but we are trying to raise the point that there aren't actually other buildings in the area with that height. And the parish council has always been strongly opposed to this development right from 2004 when it first started going through planning applications. So that's where we're sort of really looking to help preserve the village, the character of the village as a whole.
Yeah, Chairman, I think I will say that I think I go back to this site around 1994 when I first became a governor at Thiel Green, and it was, as Councillor Macro will know, it was already an issue then. But thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members for questions? There appears not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have no objectors registered to speak, nor supporters. We have the applicant, and I believe it's John Regent to speak. Aided and abetted if there are any awkward questions by others. Again, you have up to 5 minutes, Mr. Regent. Can I assist you with timekeeping?
Yes, please.
What, minute to go?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for the opportunity to speak this evening. As detailed in the committee report, this is a brownfield site, has a long and varied planning history, which I know many of you are familiar with. The current scheme before members has been negotiated with officers over 16 months, and it respects, as we've identified, the parameters plans, which set out very clearly what can and can't be developed on the site. We've also followed the council's adopted policies. We'd like to thank members and the parish council and residents for turning up on the site visit, which was ghastly and probably not the best way to see the site. With respect, I'd like to respond to the points raised by the parish council and residents. In terms of scale, the site is capable of developing 325 dwellings. We are proposing 299, a reduction of 26. We've worked with the parameters plans. They identify 3, 4, and even 5-storey that could be developed on the site with ridge heights going up to 14 metres. We are not proposing anything at 5-storey. During the course of negotiations, several dwellings were removed from the reserve matters application, and the storey heights were reduced in a number of locations. In particular, plot 1 adjacent to 41 The Green, reduced to 2 stories and moved away, trying to respect that property. And also on the southern lake edge, which Emma actually explained in terms of the articulation of those flats. The dwellings generally on the green are fronting and reflecting 2-storey development with rooms in the roof and of a red brick in character. In terms of the relationship of houses on the North Lakeshore, we've designed those in accordance with the parameters plans, and the offset distances exceed what is required. We've also recently agreed to the removal of PD rights on those dwellings, which is one of the points that the parish have raised this evening. So we're happy to respect that and agree to that condition. The extant permission has been outlined for 350. I would just reiterate that most of that is 4- and 5-storey. It's not something that we wish to pursue. We'd much prefer the scheme before members if they're minded to approve it. The North Shore was excluded from the 350, And if we did have to develop the 350, it is likely the scheme would be in the order of 400. But as I say, that is not what we want to do. We presented the CGIs. I hope members can see the quality we're trying to achieve there. And it is not in keeping with the extant permission, which is contemporary, which is completely alien to the village of Theale. So we wish to avoid that. Traffic, all developments are confronted with highways and traffic issues. The outline permission has been tested through a traffic assessment, and we are below those levels. The parking exceeds the council standards. On the scheme, there are no garages proposed. So the point that was raised earlier, there are on the 9 consented units, but on the main site, there are no garages, and we exceed the parking standard. In terms of landscape areas, we've got extensive landscape areas included, native planting that we've agreed with both the tree officer and the ecologist. It's mitigating the impact of loss of any trees and also benefiting with the biodiversity net gain. The woodland in the southeast corner, which everyone tends to overlook, is going to be retained, is going to be enhanced. There'll be a play area in there. There is a footpath link as well to the station. And the other benefit to the site is the focus of the Lakeland Walk, which is over 1 kilometre that goes all the way around the lake and will be accessible to people both in the development and externally. There are also leaps and laps proposed throughout the scheme.
And 1 minute remaining.
In terms of local facilities, I do fully appreciate, and the company does fully appreciate, that there quite often by developments, there will be an impact on doctors and dentists for local communities. If this scheme is approved and developed, we will be contributing in the order of £2 million under SIL towards the council. Part of that SIL contribution, I believe, will go to the parish, which may not fully mitigate some of the problems they're experiencing, but will certainly, we hope, help. In conclusion, I'd just like to thank officers for the report and working with us over the past 16 months. I'll be pleased to answer any other questions. And most respectfully, we would ask for members' support on this application to enable the delivery of this brownfield site that's been outstanding for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regent. Members, any questions? Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Quite rightly, in introduction, planning officers said that we are considering this application and not the other 2 extant applications you've got on board. But I think it would be wrong of me just to explore with you. You referred to 290 dwellings here, including the 70 extra care. The intention, as I understand it, is to replace those 70 if that application came forward and if you were successful, with 54 in order to do 2 things. Change the profile, but also achieve a 30% brownfield percentage of affordable housing, as opposed, I have to say, to the 40% referred to in the parish council's objection to that 54 application. But I think we all accept this as a brownfield site. Well, we'll have that debate, Councillor Macro. But that would bring you down to 274, as I understand it, because you're effectively reducing, you're taking from 70 to 54, you're taking 60 now. Okay, so that's a point on this application. So am I correct in understanding that ultimately, if you achieved all of the applications you've got in front of the council, that is your intention? Because if I explain the reason for my question, because I was intrigued by the question of 70 extra care. Now, I know that that goes back a long way. I know that that is a very historic number in this whole process. But I was intrigued by because we are considering this application tonight, I'm intrigued by your thought process in respect of 70 extra care units and whether you have done any modelling of demand, because I speak as someone who had the adult social care portfolio, and this is therefore something that interests me, that provision, whether you did any modelling to justify 70 extra care. I know these are market housing rather than affordable, and therefore it would be up to you to effectively find the owners or the tenants or whatever. But just explain that modelling to me.
So you're right in terms of the numbers. We're looking to reduce the numbers further. The outline permission is subject to a viability assessment, as members know. And under that assessment, it was agreed that 12.5% affordable would come forward, equivalent to, I think it's 41 dwellings. In the time that we've owned property, we've taken it out to the market and tested whether there is interest for a care home. So we've gone to numerous operators, and it's particularly challenging at the moment. The property market is not what any of us would hope for, but we've had very, very little interest. So we will end up with a situation where we will end up delivering all the infrastructure, assuming members approve it this evening, delivering all the roads, all of the infrastructure that goes with that, and having an area of the site that is unlikely to come forward because we don't have an operator. Whilst we can build it for them, we don't have an operator who will take it. So in discussions with officers, including the affordable housing team, we explored the alternative of getting rid of the late stage review and coming forward with 30% affordable. And we hope that in due course, when that comes in front of members, and that's something that will be considered positively.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Mays.
Yeah, my question is very, very minor. Through the drawings that I've been looking at, there's a bridge or a causeway across the middle of the lake. Is that going to be a bridge, or is it going to be built? Is that part of the peripheral footpath?
So on the outline master plans, so they are indicative master plans put forward to inform what the constraints of the site are. That was shown on those original plans. That's not something that we're proposing. So instead, we've got an extended walkway that goes around all of the lake. It weaves in and out around the lake and then goes into the woodland and creates, there's a ecology area in there. So there'll be a part that's publicly accessible. There'll be an element of a natural woodland play area in there, and that will then lead up to the station. So that bridge link is not something that we're proposing.
So there's no bridge and no causeway. Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions? I see none. Thank you. Ward member, Councillor Macro. You can stay there if you wish, whatever you're comfortable with, Councillor Macro. But your timing remains the same. Can I assist you?
Thank you. Yes, we've had the site described as scrub, which is probably pretty accurate now. However, I've been in the area many years, and I used to walk around the lake many times because it's a very pleasant walk amongst trees. Been a lot of land management over the years, various owners, and a lot of trees have been felled. So now, unfortunately, the site is not as attractive as it used to be. I tend to agree, but I more than tend to agree with the parish council on things like the height of buildings and the density, which I don't think are really appropriate for the age of a village. However, we've basically been stuck with that with the appeal inspector's verdict. And also, I would like to say, he mentioned needed high density for viability purposes. I would have thought viability came in when the land was purchased rather than when the land is built out, but there we are. But I do have one kind of fairly major concern. I was always been worried about noise from the bypass, which has increased dramatically since the lots of the trees were felled. And I found a document on the website called Noise Control Scheme. I thought, well, that looks interesting. However, it's not really a noise control scheme at all, but it's a report on noise modelling. And to validate that model, the applicants had some monitoring done. Now, I have a lot of problems with that monitoring because it was done on the 21st, 22nd of October, 2021. The 22nd, rather, was a bank holiday. Sorry, not bank holiday, it's a half-term holiday. And the following week was also half-term. And also at that time, we were still recovering from COVID. So the traffic levels were much lower than they are before and since. The monitoring, there was one spot they did 24-hour monitoring along the bypass. The other spots were only monitored between 11:40 a.m. and 14:40 in the afternoon. So missing the peak times and also the kind of school times. So I don't think that monitoring is really going to find the times when the traffic noise is at its maximum. So if the committee is minded to approve the application, I'd ask that they that's subject to some more monitoring being done at times which are more appropriate and typical, and the model then be revalidated, and if that shows us a problem, to look again at those prevention measures. Emma mentioned the 1.8 metre close border fence. That's only along the bypass, doesn't go round the roundabout, which only has post and rail. So those extra care sheltered homes are going to be exposed to the full noise from traffic going around the roundabout, and also things like headlights. There's one other thing also. I noticed in the drainage officer's report that part of the site, particularly where the flats will be built, piling will be used. So I'd like the standard piling condition to also be attached, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Macro. Any questions for the ward member? Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, thank you. Just to clarify the position of the council on the original application, you referred to the appeal, and I immediately assumed when I saw that there had been an appeal that had been an appeal against refusal of planning permission, whereas investigating it was actually an appeal on other grounds, as I understand it. And I wonder whether you agree with me that actually the decision of this committee back in January 2017 was to grant planning permission on the basis of the outline.
I'm sorry, you've got me at a loss. I haven't gone back and checked that myself. I had kind of relied on my brain, which is obviously not.
I've got the minutes in front of me, Councillor Macro.
Loaded question.
So yes, indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. Just thinking off the top of my head, Councillor Macro, would it be fair to say that traffic going round a roundabout would be at a much lower speed than along the bypass at full speed, and perhaps the noise abatement might not be as required there? I'd take your point about the headlights, though.
Well, the traffic will be going slower, yes, but on the other hand, it'll be changing gear and so on. There'll be more traffic because you get the traffic coming from the Pangbourne direction and from Thiel turning towards Newbury or towards Pangbourne. So there's actually more traffic than there is actually on the bypass. But there's also on the opposite side of the bypass to the site, there's a large number of depots which are supplying aggregate, cement, asphalt and oil. So there's a lot of trucks emanate from there during the day. And also at night, there's a large number of articulated HGVs originating from Thatcham, who could come along there to join the M4. So they will also be negotiating the roundabout and the bypass, and that can cause quite a lot of disturbance at night.
Thank you. Still on questions to ward member? Looking around, I see no more. Right, thank you, Councillor Macro. Next then is questions for our officers. Clearly, Planning Officer Emma, but if there are highways issues, I have Mr. Goddard here who can assist us with those. I don't know whose hand went up first. I'm going to take Councillor Macro, then Councillor Somner, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Regent described the site as being brownfield. I believe that's not technically correct because it's a restored mineral working. So could I just have a confirmation of that, please?
Right, Emma or Lydia, can you assist?
Yes. This has been looked at in detail, and we didn't reach a conclusion whether it's brownfield or greenfield based on a number of sort of based on like looking at the definition within the MPPF with regards to greenfield lands, because as you correctly identify, it has been restored. However, I think material to this application is to look at the extant permissions which could be implemented, which therefore have been implemented.
So it was originally not brownfield, but because of that application being implemented, it could be regarded as such now.
Well, it's a valid fallback position, the implementation of the extant permissions.
Thank you.
Well, you've got an answer there, right? Good, excellent. I thought it was Councillor Somner next.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for each of our learned officers, if I might, please. With regards to comments that have been made, there was one made earlier about vehicle movements being 600. The highways report within the paperwork focuses understandably on parking. I wonder if Mr. Goddard has anything available with regards to vehicle movement at all.
We'll come back to you on that one.
In that case, whilst he's
Let's pose the
doing
next
that,
question.
and I thought that might be the case. So
Okay.
whilst he's doing that, Emma, the other question that's been raised, or the point that's been raised a couple of times, is with regards to the land at the roundabout end of the site. Do you have anything which displays in the plan something substantially for that end with regards to landscaping? I can see that, well, from my view of it, it's not going to be work that's right up to. I'm minded of the development currently going on at Dorking Way in my own area. And of course, that virtually backs onto the motorway, junction 12. Now there is, again, fencing going up along the motorway edge of it there. But again, that doesn't go onto the roundabout. So it feels to me like we're looking at a very similar situation, and obviously that's gone through. But anything that you've got to inform us about that end would be great. Thank you.
Okay, yes. So the application was supported by a noise assessment, which looked at the noise within different parts of the site, different receptors. It was concluded that acoustic fencing wasn't required, and the scheme has been designed to take into account its proximity to the road. Buildings themselves are set back, buildings will be double glazed, gardens are also set behind the buildings effectively, so that the building itself then provides a barrier. So with the extra care, for example, it does look onto the roundabout, but it sort of wraps around its amenity space. So therefore that amenity space will be quieter because it's screened by the building. So there's ways to design around and mitigate noise impact. There is also landscaping, both existing within that part of the site and also proposed to sort of supplement that screen as a sort of barrier to noise. And it was found that an acoustic fence wasn't necessary.
Thank you.
Right. Mr. Goddard, have you come up with any figures? Still looking. Well, I'll keep looking. Councillor Cotton. Well, are there any further questions to officers? Are we reaching a conclusion? I'll just pause for a minute to give Mr. Goddard a chance. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, if I may, a point of clarification rather than a question to
Okay,
officers.
please do.
I've been looking at the previous decision and I just want to clarify for Councillor Macro's benefit, and I do apologise, Councillor Macro, 40% was what officers were recommending in the original, because the number, there's no percentage in the minutes. It was, I think it's buried in the part 2 debate. There was a part 2 debate about various clarification of because this is quite an unusual section 106 agreement relating to the overage and everything else. So I think that there was a big discussion I suspect there was a big discussion in part 2 if we found the part 2 papers and looked at those in private.
I remember, Councillor Bridgman.
So the number that was the number that came forward that we agreed on, and I'll just deal with the we agreed on in a moment, was 27. And that in the paragraph about the 27, there's a reference to the normal number would be 130. Well, 130 is 40% of 325 or whatever the number was. So that's, I take that point. In fact, the decision we took was indicative because the appeal had already been started, I think, for non-determination. So we weren't there actually deciding on the application. We were there to give an indication as to what we would have decided had we been listening to it. So I just wanted to make that clarification, Chairman.
Most grateful. Mr. Goddard, I think you have an answer.
And also to give Mr. Gordon more time.
Well, you managed that. Well done.
Thank you. Well used. Thank you, Chairman. This consent has this site has a very long history of planning consents, and the original outline, the second outline from 2015 projected 1,158 vehicle movements per day. It's obviously about half of that in, half of that out. And during peak travel periods, about 142 vehicle movements. So most would leave in the morning, most would return in the afternoon. The scheme before you is a little bit smaller and does have a care home included instead of houses. So 100 vehicle movements has been lost, which gives 1,056 per day. So around 525 in, 525 out per day. And during peak travel periods, morning and afternoon, you would expect about 130 vehicle movements. But obviously all of this, all the traffic impact from this site was all assessed a very long time ago. And there have been many consents that have replaced the consent before. But I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you.
And before we enter debate, just a final one from me, possibly to Emma. The ward member, Councillor Macro, asked about noise monitoring. Is that a legitimate thing for us to seek if we are minded to grant permission, or do we have the sufficient information in front of us to make that decision without that request?
Yeah, thank you. So there is the application was accompanied by a noise survey, and this was reviewed by Environmental Health, and they were satisfied that that survey was carried out in accordance with the required standards and was an accurate calculation of the impacts. There is also a condition on the outline which required the noise levels not to exceed certain volumes, and the scheme adheres to those. So all in all, I don't believe it would be reasonable to put an extra condition on. I feel that has already been satisfactorily explored.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, any more questions, or I'm looking for someone to start the debate? Come on, someone has to, don't be shy. Councillor Linner, you came to the site visit in the snow. I'm most grateful to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and I was freezing in my wellies. Right, yeah, this site has been going on for donkey's years since I first joined the council in the mid-80s, where it had a planning permission. Obviously, that is a long time ago, and planning policy guidance has intervened on there. I mean, my personal view is looking at the site. It's got a planning permission for a much larger site, if you exclude the care home area. I think this planning application is a vast improvement on that. And that's why my personal view is to support officer's recommendation. So that's my tuppence so far and what I've heard so far and reading the report, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Linda. Councillor Cotton.
Yes, as Councillor Sommer raised the question, I'm very concerned about the noise impact on the residents here, and would encourage the committee to reconsider that maybe we look again at providing acoustic fencing, because there is a precedent. I mean, if you go to the M4, I know it's a lot bigger and a lot faster road, but the fencing is a lot further back, whereas this is literally adjacent to the A4. I think, I know this is probably a weak one, but future proofing, because there are quite good possibilities that major increases in lorry traffic will be coming past that area. And my simplistic understanding, going on to the roundabout, if you have a break in a barrier, then it really has it lessens the effect of preventing the noise actually getting within the site. So I just think we're here to protect the community, and I think this is so close to probably the major road. What is the figure? 22,000 car movements a day on the A4 or something like that. I think that justifies going that extra mile and looking to try provide some better noise protection. Thank you.
Well, great for the comment. We've had an answer. Councillor Somno, can you assist?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm going to stick on the acoustic fencing side of things, because I've actually got 2 areas of acoustic fencing that's been put in within my ward. The one that I mentioned earlier in the Dorking Way development, which, as I was walking around it the other day, yes, the traffic's there. It's never going to get rid of it. The other is along the A4, which of course was widened a few years ago, and that was put in for the buildings immediately bordering onto the A4. And I have to say, again, walking around that area, it's actually very efficient in what it does. It does a fine job. And again, I think I can't move away from the fact that looking at the Dorking Way site, there is the M4, there is fencing on the straightaway, if you like, on the slip road even, but it's not on the roundabout, and that was mentioned several times at site visits and various visits that have taken place around there, including since the development started. I think we need to look at that as a technical way of addressing it, and I think it does a good job. I think the other thing for me is, and Councillor Linda mentioned this, that the developer, the applicant, all seem to be very sympathetic to that particular area. And again, like Councillor Linda, I mean, I started driving in 1985, and I'm a tireless boy through and through. This site has been like it is at the moment for as long as I can remember, and I think actually it would be good for the area in some ways to get something in there which really tidies that end of that stretch. I'm looking at the designs that have been put before us tonight, and I do think that goes away to actually doing that. It looks sympathetic. It looks like it's not necessarily in keeping with what's there, because Steele's an old village. But at the other end of the village, there are 3-storey buildings for the James Busher end of things. So it's not completely out of context for the area. I am leaning towards supporting this application at this stage, Chairman. Happy to hear colleagues' views.
Well, we'll hear some more comments. Councillor Linda, I'll come back to you. I just think I'm going to ask our planning officers a little guidance, in that we have mentioned noise and noise monitoring before. I understand the point you have made, or both of you have made, about acoustic fencing and its efficacy. But is it a reasonable thing for us to ask, in that a lot of work and the relevant experts, those by that I mean our environmental health officers, who are the professionals who have that knowledge to make a comment, what flexibility, if any, do we have, or would it be unreasonable to put in a condition that isn't recommended in that way by our other professional officers, the environmental health? Could I seek some guidance at this stage, just to help debate?
I think when we need to bear in mind when we apply conditions, they need to be reasonable and necessary to make the development acceptable. The application, as I say, was supported by the noise survey, which concluded it wasn't necessary. And for that reason, I would be concerned about having a condition. However, if it was a strong concern for members, and it was something that they were looking, to have as a strong concern, it's probably something the applicant would be able to address through a condition.
Just to assist, I mean, could we have an advisory on there rather than a condition that an acoustic fence be provided in the future if needed on completion of the development? Because you went to some great length, Emma, to explain that the buildings were arranged such that they would form the barrier. And I'm not being flippant when I say this, but having listened to a Grand Designs recently, where a building was erected under a railway arch adjacent, within literally feet of a railway line, acoustic glass and so on really is 100% effective. So I'm just a little nervous about putting something in that is not I'm going to call it a legitimate reason for us to add a condition. Does that make sense? Does that help you with your answer? Yeah, team leader. Yes, please, Lydia.
Thank you. I've been looking at the noise assessment. So it relies on treatments to the facade of the buildings and the windows to reduce the sound levels, which is why the acoustic fence isn't proposed, because it can meet the maximum noise levels in the condition that the inspector applied by insulation and fenestration measures, which are what's shown in the noise assessment.
And why I'm probing this at this stage, without preventing debate, is I'm acutely aware that there are similar, but even taller buildings that have an extant permission that a planning inspector would have had taken a noise into account. So I'm a little nervous about us throwing extra things in where there is a scheme that is broadly similar that does not have, I believe, the acoustic fencing. So we've got to be seen to be reasonable in any conditions that we put on any application if we are minded to approve. Does that make sense, Lydia?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. It would also be a requirement to comply with the condition.
Yes.
So the measures would need to be provided in any event.
Right. I hope that hasn't muddied the waters. Councillor Linder, you spoke, so I'll come back to you, I promise. Councillor Mackrell and Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I wasn't asking necessarily for an acoustic barrier. What I was asking was that the monitoring be repeated in a more typical environment. And if that then indicated that acoustic barrier was required, then that would then have to be dealt with. But I mean, if and the other thing I did mean to mention before, the other application is mentioned to replace the extra care with flats. That's relying on the same monitoring period. So it's not that onerous because it would actually cover 2 planning applications.
I hear what you say. We clearly cannot determine the one that is in progress. We have to determine what's in front of us. But Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, that is one of my points, that we are where we are. We're looking at this application. I entirely take the point about the extra care housing. We have an application based on an extant permission for that 70-unit extra care. I didn't read it as a care home, but I take what the applicant says, that the intention was to provide a care home. I can understand why they might have thought that was necessary. Indeed, it possibly is necessary within the district, but that's up to the applicant as they come forward. Chairman, on the question of noise, entirely take your point. We are where we have an extant permission for more than is effectively being proposed here. And I am always keen, if we can, to ameliorate the effect of development. And if we have an applicant who comes forward with actually a smaller scheme than they've got permission for, I tend to view that favourably. So far as the noise is concerned, I think one of the questions for the applicant, and we can put an informative on as much as we like, is the market. You know, if I'm buying one of the properties that fronts onto the A4, am I actually going to want to straight front onto the A4, whatever noise measures there are built into the building? And that will be a question for the market. Will people buy those properties if they haven't put acoustic fencing up? I don't know. We know, no doubt we will find out. But Chairman, I'm minded to support, because I do think we are in a better place than we might have otherwise been. I say that, Chairman.
It is indeed a rare thing for an applicant to come in with a lower number. We see higher numbers all the time, do we not? Councillor Lind, I said I'll come back to you. So here over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
But
Yes.
I'm looking for a proposal.
Yeah. So just coming back on the acoustic fencing, you know, I also was delivering leaflets at Bewley Homes, Dorking Way, on the A4 and the M4, and noticed the noise there. We've also got the Field Community Fire Station, which obviously has noise there. The police, who also operate from there, and South Central service on red lights with people there, not actual, you know, people being based there and coming out. And that is the main noise from red lights. There's also Arlington nearby. But really on a point to what Lydia Mather said, you know, people do enjoy outside their buildings as well, you know, and having to face noise for their outside entertainment, especially in the summer or whatever, that noise is a factor, not just in buildings. And I would also sympathise, not only with Councillor Sumner and Councillor Cotham's view, but also Councillor Bridgman's. I'm just waiting for another member to put in a suggestion for a decision, Chairman.
Councillor Somner, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll make one final point, because my parish chairman will never forgive me if I don't, and that is to raise a concern about the increased population for Theale and available healthcare facilities. And I phrase that carefully, knowing full well from my day job that it's not about providing doctors. That's a separate conversation. That said, Chairman, I'm happy to propose that we accept a recommendation before us.
Right, so proposing officer's recommendation.
Indeed.
I'm obliged now to ask if that's seconded. Councillor Bridgman. Are there any? Right, Councillor Macker, I never preclude debate.
Thank you.
Come back to us,
I was going to ask, I'm disappointed, obviously, about the noise issue, but can I ask that we have the standard piling condition added, please?
Oh, yes, I remember the piling conditions. Can I take advice?
Yeah, so there is a piling condition on the outline. Condition 8 asks for a piling method statement to be submitted if piling is to take place. So it is a matter that would normally be dealt with at outline stage, and the inspector has dealt with it appropriately. So I don't think it would be necessary again.
Thank you.
If it's there already. Finally, the last word before I go to a vote, Councillor Cottam.
With the mic on, preferably. Yeah, following on Councillor Linden's comments, you know, people enjoying the facility of where they live. Unless these units are air conditioned, they're going to be opening their windows in summer. I stick on this point, and I understand why other councillors will go ahead with it, maybe, but I really think noise can ruin people's lives, and with the high volume of traffic that goes along the A4, I think a small addition of some acoustic fencing would not go amiss. Thank you for that last point.
Well, you made the point. I don't see any other hands going up. So broadly, we have a proposal for officer's recommendation. With piling is covered by the outline. We've covered noise, and we are convinced at this stage by our officers that sufficient work and advice has been taken. So those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3. Conditional permission is granted. Well, that is the only item, members. I'm going to ask if we can close the meeting. Thank you for your debate. Please remain seated. I'd like to discuss site visits, etc.